everyone. Welcome to the Convocation Unscripted. And if you are wondering if something feels a little bit different, you're right, because we are live. We do this once a month, and where I join my co-host, Diana Butler Bass. Say hello.
Hello.
Kristen Dumay
Hey, good to see you.
and and Robbie Jones.
Cheers, mate.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, okay. You're across the pond. All right. Tell us where you are, Robbie, real quick.
With the grace hospitality of Catherine Stewart. I'm actually hanging out in London and for the week, and or actually this week and next week, trying desperately to finish the next book. So
Okay, and I think the rest of us scrubs are at home. We're of course four scholars, three historians, and a sociologist who explore how religion shapes America's past and present. But we're responding in real time to the events of the day. We don't have any prep or scripts, but our lifetime of experience, and we're just drawing on that for this raw, unfiltered conversation. That's why we call it the Convocation Unscripted. And this episode, this live episode, is officially in session. So, Robbie, since we were already talking about you, and you kind of we all get interesting mail and comments. I think I just got one that I won't get into right now, but you had one, Robbie, that you shared with us in our group chat, and it got us all thinking. So, would you tell us about that?
sure, yeah, first I'll just say we love comments. So whether it's on our Substack platform, whether it's directly on YouTube, and just reminding everyone you can comment directly on YouTube as well. And we are monitoring those comments, and so we're going to bring one in just to kind of kick things off. That said, they're a fan, love it, but finding themselves feeling a little jaded, just by the constant, you won't believe what just happened now, and same thing day after day after day, kind of a Groundhog Day experience, and worried about getting caught up in the negativity, I think, of that, and not being able to sort of think about what do we do? How can we manage the chaos? How can we manage our own, responses to it, and try to get to do something productive in the meantime. So that's kind of one we thought we'd just start off with. And I should say too that we are going to spend most of the time today taking your questions, your comments. So if you want to put those, actually, if you could kind of put those in the Q&A thing so we can keep them separate from the chat, that would really help us. So go ahead and put those there. We're going to get to that in about 20 minutes. But in the chat, please do introduce yourselves, tell us where you're from, and you can kind of keep a running commentary. It's always really interesting to see what's happening there with each other in the chat. So that's the first thing that kind of came across to me. And Jamar, you said you got a couple of the comments as well.
Yeah, it's I get it, right? Like we are under a fascist regime, and when the four of us get on the mic, we're talking about it. And for me, and I'll just speak for myself, everybody can speak for themselves. There's two things that come up. Number one, this is the ratio. uh, Most of the news that's happening, particularly on the political side, is bad. That's not to say all of it, but a preponderance, especially from the federal level, is bad stuff going on. One of the things that's been remarkable to me is that scholars of authoritarianism are saying, yeah, this checks all the boxes, but what they also say is what is surprising to them is how rapidly it's happening, how quickly we're going down this road. So we're just calling balls and strikes, as the saying goes, and the reality is a lot of it is negative. The other motivation that I have for bringing this up is it still is incredibly frustrating how few people seem to be aware of what's really going on and how dire it is. So the folks who would tune into the convocation, you're more informed, I would say, than the general populace. And so you are getting this volume of information that it seems negative and bad all the time because you're actually paying attention. But one of the things that I think all of us have mentioned in various circumstances is how frustrating it is when you're interacting with people who who A, don't know what's going on at all because they just got their heads in the sand and aren't paying attention, or B, are minimizing it and saying that we're all chicken littles and screaming the sky is falling, and actually it's not that bad. So as for me, part of the motivation is to address those twin issues. One, this is the news that's coming out, and two, there are still so many people who are way behind on knowing what the heck's going on. But I'll be interested to hear other thoughts on that. Kristen, you're dealing with this all the time. You sort of have remarked how you feel bad sometimes when you're speaking to groups, and you bring so much uh, negative no's. How are you navigating this?
Yeah, I'm surprised people keep inviting me because I'm always a bit of a downer. Um, I I don't know what to say except first of all, for the three of the four of us who are historians here, historians tend to be critics, and we're also very aware. And Robbie's an honorary historian. he-
Hey, I'll take it.
right. I mean, the stories from the past, right? They do bring lessons. And often those lessons come in the form of, you don't want to do this. This is what happens when you do this. This is what happens when you don't do this, right? And so, I think that we all have eyes to see, and we want to communicate that out. But I mean, the truth is, there is very little that one person can do. Sometimes one person can change history. More often, a small group of people can change history, but only if they know what's going on, right? So I think part of our motivation here is to tell as many people what's going on in as much as we understand what's going on, to give people the tools. And we don't know which people are going to do the thing that leads to the other thing that leads to the other thing that ultimately changes history, because that is how history works,
Mm.
right? That's how history plays out. And you don't know what that thing is, and you don't know who's going to do the thing. And it's often very surprising. So I think that's part of what we're doing here, is just feeling the burden of sharing what it is that we know because we have eyes to see. Um, that said, yeah, it can be, it can lead to despair. And if you follow me on Substack, you'll see a pattern. There's doom and gloom. There is, and honestly, those are some of my more popular posts. And then I always balance them. Sometimes every other, at least every two or three, with messages of hope, because if you're just despairing, you're not going to be in a place to do the things that might spark the other things. And so we can find hope. Certainly we can find hope in understanding the goodness that persists despite the darkness that surrounds us, right? And so it's kind of this back and forth, this give and take. And depending on the day, you might get one or the other from me. Depending on the day, you might need to hear one or the other, right? And I think that could vary for every single one of us here.
So we'll go to Robbie and then you, Diana. I totally resonate with that, Kristen. It's going to be both. The ratio may not be equal, but we do need to cultivate moments or spaces of hope, and really, I think just perspective, to understand that, yeah, it's really hard to make change on a large scale, and you kind of keep putting stuff out there, information out there, hoping that the right people will latch onto it and take action. And that could be some of y'all tuning in and listening. What about you, Robbie? What were your thoughts when you got that message, or you're the one who's first read it?
Yeah, well, I totally appreciate it. And the I think the balance thing is really important, and I think we all have to try to find that in our own lives, and that can also mean, um, you know, just going to a baseball game, right? It can mean kind of taking a step back with family, friends, and those kinds of things as well. And I think we've got to find the rhythm. I got another note just today from a fellow writer who said he's just having to take a month off for his mental health.
Mm.
And I wrote him back and I said, "Good for you. That is totally right. This is a marathon. Hand the baton over. It'll be here for you when you come back, right? Yeah, absolutely. Do that. And I think one of the things that holding this space together, I hope, is doing is all helping us hang in there, right? Because there is some comfort, I think, too, in realizing like, okay, I'm not the only one seeing this. I'm not the only one worried about this. I'm not, you know, overreacting, especially, if you're, I put a note in there. I used to live in Springfield, Missouri. And hello, folks from Springfield. Thanks for being here. And, I remember that, it felt like sometimes a different world, right, from some of the national news that I would see. And there was a different kind of bubble there. My family is still in Jackson, Mississippi. Whenever I go home there, it definitely feels like a bubble in a different world that's disconnected. And even when I talk with my parents and stuff and say, no, actually, when we went to see the Washington Spirit play the women's professional soccer team last weekend, and as we got off the metro, there were these clusters of always in fours, armed to the teeth, National Guard units in full fatigues with M16s strapped to their chests, just randomly standing on the street corners between the metro and the ball field. And then my son went, into town, into the city to meet some friends. And I said, look, if you get on the metro and you see anyone get on that is not in uniform with a bulletproof vest on and it says ICE or Homeland Security, I want you to just quietly get off the car and wait for the next train. Like, and I've never had to tell my kids like that, about law enforcement. But in this is real, right? And it's particularly real in DC. And if you're in Chicago, as probably some people here, it may be real very, very soon in Chicago as well.
Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing the comment. I mean, I think it says a lot about you and the spirit that we're trying to cultivate in this show, that we get a comment like that, and you didn't take a defensive posture. You said, okay, this is information that we need to hear, and we wanted to make space to respond to it. And as was said earlier, we do read these comments. I'll read a few at the end of our time today, and so keep them coming on whether on Substack or the YouTube channel. And also want to remind you quickly again, use the Q&A box. We've got 12 questions so far, and with 250 people signed on, I know there are more. So keep them coming, and we're going to leave ample time to respond to some of those questions as we go further. But Diana, what are your thoughts?
One of the things I thought when Robby first shared the comment with us all was like, well, what do people expect? It's been a awful, terrible summer if you're paying attention to the news. And the honest truth of it is we're four human beings, and we're as shocked and overwhelmed as anybody else, despite the fact that we can talk about these things and we have some level of expertise in them from various angles. It doesn't mean that we aren't feeling them. And it doesn't mean that we don't need each other in order to process what's going on. So some of what you hear on this podcast is literally us trying to figure it out with one another, feeling as overwhelmed, honestly, as you all. And so I think that's really important for all of us to keep in mind right now. There is no expert who can solve all these problems or wave some magic wand right now and make all this go away. The best we can be is, a friend of mine always used to say, we're just human beings on the same bus. And that's how I think about this right now. And so when you hear us talk, we really are unscripted. We haven't gotten together to try to plan how to make you feel better in advance, because we ourselves might not be feeling better. So that was kind of my first take. And then it is also helpful to know that we each have sort of natural dispositions and our own experiences in dealing with traumatic and scary stuff. And, for years and years and years, I was known as the hope lady. And it's actually kind of scary to me because it puts a lot of pressure on you when you walk into a room and everybody's like looking at you really eagerly to make them feel better. And I remember oh, probably about 2 years ago when I walked into some room where another friend of mine was, I could say her name actually, Julie Ingersoll, who teaches about Christian nationalism and has been for almost 30 years. And she said, the only time she was really upset is when she saw me be without hope.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh my gosh, that's one of my best friends, saying that to me. And so, we each bring who we are to this moment. And for me, that's generally an optimistic and hopeful person. And so when I am without hope, I know that really upsets people around me. And I'm really sorry. I wish there was something I could do about that. But I'm just being honest about who I am. And I know that my friends here too, that they're working out of who they are very honestly. And you're really seeing parts of us here that are deeply genuine and forthright. And in doing that, we're actually taking risks.
Hmm.
And I would ask people to hold on to that for just a second, is that we're trying to find safety and our own footing while we're actually doing something that's kind of risky, because we're trying to model for you all and encourage you all how to do the same in your settings, how to really talk to people, how to share with people honestly, how to bring your whole self into this difficult moment, and to tell the truth in the best ways that you know how. And so if we kind of lose the thread on that once in a while, it's because this is just a really hard moment. And we're doing the best we can. And we hope that you all are doing the best you can as well. And I guess my only sort of moment of sort of hopefulness is this summer I've thought a lot about how many centuries in the history of Christianity have gone by. And in most of those centuries, most people who were Christians were living in situations of unfreedom, lack of liberty, minimal sense of personal fulfillment, genuine danger, and other kinds of historical moments that were not pleasant in any way, shape, or form, where there was real risk, real pain, and life was short, brutish, and nasty. I think that was the three words. And so that's actually given me a little bit of that historical hope back, because those people in those centuries didn't give up, and they did astonishing things with their lives, created astonishing beauty, wrote astonishing books, raised their children the best they could, built families and towns and houses, and just did their work with faithfulness. And so that's kind of restored a little bit of, I guess, maybe the Hope Lady, who I hope can show up at least a little bit this fall.
I've
Well,
I've seen that in my I'm not the Hope Lady. Never ever have I been confused for the Hope Lady. In fact, at the end of every presentation, almost invariably, I'm given this like desperate question from either the host or an audience member, like, can you give us some hope? Just a little bit. My editor made me rewrite the end of Jesus and John Wayne to give just a little bit of hope. I'm sure that's going to happen again in this next book. But I found helpful historians of the civil rights movement in thinking about this question of hope. And Tim Tyson has this essay on the subject of essentially like, no, hope often isn't found in history. Very, very rarely does it surface. And that's really great when it does. But I think it kind of depends on, the kind of history that you write, the kind of history that you immerse yourself in. And it's not that there isn't hope there, but the hope doesn't come from the history lessons. Now, in the civil rights movement, there was change. That can be a source of hope. But the people living in that moment, the people working for generations, like decades and decades, they weren't sensing the hope.
Mm.
What was right in their face was the violence, the ever-present threat, the deaths, right? The assault on their dignity, on their families, on their children. And they persisted. Jamar, I wonder if you could speak to that at all. And, what kind of resilience can you bring us? Can the past bring us voices from the past and maybe help us understand, maybe a different kind of hope, maybe a little bit more of a grittier kind of hope?
Oh, that's so good. I love being on here with historians and honorary historians. Barbara
They're going to
just
give
made.
me a little badge or something at some point, right?
We'll get you your historian card.
Yeah.
Um, Barbara made the comment, I believe hope is a verb, not a noun. And I just think that's so important. I think even us getting on the mic is an act of hope.
Yeah.
But Kristen, you talked about, what are some lessons from history? I did kind of try to write a book on this. Oh, and by the way, it's really good timing. And we didn't even plan this. This is unscripted. But the Spirit of Justice turned 1 year old this week. Actually, the release day was yesterday. So the anniversary was yesterday. So this is the subtitle is True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. And the funny part is I always, in my mind, confuse resistance with resilience. Like it could have been either of those words. Um, One of the things we should remember about the civil rights movement is this is coming at the tail end of nearly a century of Jim Crow. And the only reason it's the tail end is you have a movement to end it. So for decades, from essentially right after the Civil War to the 1960s, essentially, you have legalized segregation, you have lynching, you have all sorts of exclusions. Like one of the things that we have to understand about that era is it's not just the actual physical violence, it's the exclusion that was happening where black people couldn't join unions, women couldn't even vote till 1920, right? Like all of this is happening. So what do you do then? There's not there's they lynchings were happening so often. The NAACP had a flag that said a man was lynched today. That is, they would put out every time another one happened. That's how frequently you're hearing about these things. And how do people keep going? It's all the basics. It was local, it was community, it was faith. But one thing they didn't do was deny what was happening. As a matter of fact, here's the interesting thing you learn when you study history. It's the people who were most immersed in the bad news who became the people who brought good news. Not just the gospel. I'm just talking about hope. These were for example, and I'll end it. Fannie Lou Hamer, who I always talk about. But think about this. She was born and raised in Sunflower County, Mississippi, the Delta. I lived in the Delta on the Arkansas side. For Mississippi and for Arkansas, it's the poorest region of the state, and it's the region of the state with the highest concentration of Black people. She was born the 20th of 20 children. They had to wear rags on their feet. Sometimes all they had for dinner was flour mixed with fat to make a sort of gravy. And she married a sharecropper. She had nothing earthly going for her. And so it's a place of crushing despair. And yet, at church, she hears from these civil rights activists, voting rights activists, and she volunteers to go to register to vote, where she was turned away at gunpoint just to register to vote. And isn't it so interesting that the places of deepest despair generate the groups and the individuals who have the strongest hope? But they didn't do that by turning away from what was happening. They leaned in.
Mark, that actually reminds me of one of the things we saw yesterday. It's a different setting, but the young women who have brought these charges against the Epstein estate and are insisting that we get the files released about that. I mean, those are women who have been through some of the worst possible human abuse and darkness, being traded as sexual slaves essentially by really rich men who abused their bodies and their souls and then discarded them. And so they do not they have not turned away from the evil that was done from them, yet can stand in public and shine a light. And if you watch that whole press conference like I did, it was very painful. It was deeply wrenching. There were people who were crying. But at the same time, those women were standing in power and claiming the possibility of real change and holding the powerful to account. And so ultimately, the people who told the deepest truth and had the worst experiences were also the ones who brought the greatest vision of transformation, which might even be a better word than hope at this point.
I'm so glad you brought them up, Diana, because yes, if you haven't watched that press conference or even a portion of it, start there. And you're right, like those who have known the greatest darkness are speaking most powerfully into this, and they should not have to. It should not have gotten to this point that those victims who have already had so much taken away from them. The testimony of Marina I want to make sure I get this right, Lacerda, the Brazilian woman, who told her story, and what she said is like what was done to her. Like if you know victims of sexual abuse, this is familiar. Like took her memories away. It was hard for her to piece together. She was so young at the time, working 3 jobs, trying to support her family, her immigrant family. And she said, I want those documents because I want to piece my memories back together. Right? I mean, that's the level of personal loss. And these are the women who are standing up, and they know the cost in doing this. Many of the women who were speaking yesterday have never spoken publicly about this. And they are stepping up in this moment, knowing what the cost is likely to be. So listen to them and then figure out what's the equivalent for the rest of us, right? There are so many models of courage if you just look for them.
That's so good. We're going to transition to Q&A here, and thank you for those of you who have dropped in your questions. You still have time while we are talking. We're going to choose our own questions, but to kick us off, I'm going to kick this one to you, Robby. I feel like with your stats and data, maybe you can shed some analytical light on Linda's question. She says, I have more than a few folks who are ardent Trump supporters. Their eyes don't see anything but declaring things have never been better. Is it still worth engaging?
Yeah. So, again, I'm someone with plenty of relatives and friends down in Mississippi, that I think fit that description well. And I've just tried to keep talking, and to kind of keep saying, look, this is my experience, this is the way it makes me feel. I know, Diana, we've had a conversation where you've had similar conversations and saying, like, telling that story about, going to the soccer game, telling a story about having to have this conversation with my son about staying away from, people with police and ice vests on for his own safety. And he's a white kid, right? Kind of sandy blonde hair. So, but yet I feel that deeply. I think the thing it is about, like, I think a lot about like witnessing, testifying, that's part of what we're called to do. And I think for those of us who are white, and become and still have connections into that world, I think it is kind of unsettling the comfort zone, unsettling I mean, frankly, it's a lot of kind of arrogance and even glee sometimes that people are experiencing, just kind of saying like, wait a minute, like, no, right? That's not where I'm at. Let me tell you where I'm at on this, and just in trying to sort of say like, this is how I feel about it. This is what people I know are going through. This is what people I know are fearful about. Like, I have another friend of my daughter's who is a DACA recipient, who is in the country, right, under the DACA provisions, has protections from the federal government, and her own job has told her not to come into work in DC because even though she has legal protections right now, they've told her you can work indefinitely from home because we're worried about you getting on the metro and getting snatched off the street by masked people with no identification, and no one will know what happened to you, right? So that's kind of the world in which we're, and like, Republican or Democrat, like this is not a partisan issue. I think that's the thing that I've had to make the shift on is that try to make the shift be like, this is not about Democrats and Republicans. I mean, we're way beyond that. This is not about polarization. We are way beyond the problems of polarization. This is about a creeping authoritarianism and fascism that is going to sweep all of us into the undertow, Republicans and Democrats alike, here, if we don't do something about it. These are the kind of basic freedoms that the country was, supposedly established on. And if we can't see our way enough to kind of just because like, because I'm Republican, I somehow feel like this is not coming for me, is deeply, deeply, deeply mistaken.
I'll add just a couple of things to that. One, if you still are in some sort of relationship with folks like that, if you can talk to them, because I don't have those people in my life. I would venture to say a lot of us on here don't typically, maybe because of family, but because of your public statements, right? People know where you stand. So like if you're not talking to them, they may not hear it from anyone else. And I say that sensitively because I know how hard these conversations are. But then to strategy, we've mentioned before, and Robby just mentioned it, like testimony, witnessing, like whatever facts, whatever data you have, if you can couch that in a story, that's helpful. It's accessible. It's like, a spoonful of sugar helps medicine go down. In this case, the sugar is the story. That is more relatable, that is less confrontational, right? Uh, so I think that actually requires practice, literally rehearsing these conversations, figuring out what I wouldn't do is just think that spontaneously you're going to be inspired in the moment and know exactly what to say. That takes practice. We can have these conversations on this podcast because we've had these conversations thousands of times before, and then we can get on and be unscripted. But that takes a while. And at the beginning, it does have to be almost scripted in the sense of being confident where you know that you know where you're going to go in the conversation. Anybody else want to respond to that, or you can just jump to the next question?
I'll jump to another one that it kind of builds on something that Robby said in his response, which is, whether Republican or Democrat, this is coming for you too. Yes, absolutely. But there's a flip side here, and I had a question on that from Yvonne. You're right. I've mentioned this in my Substack, I think, and also last week. The question here is, please talk about something Kristen has mentioned several times along the lines of being aware not to accept advantages that may come our way at a cost to others who are paying the price. Yes, this is actually this sense and sensibility is coming from research on my next book and research into systems of manipulation and control, into authoritarian systems, which is funny because the book is called Live, Laugh, Love. But a couple of years ago, it took a dark turn. So anyway, I spent a lot of time researching kind of how these high control systems work in churches, in parachurches and small groups and in governments. And what became very clear to me is they work through two mechanisms primarily, actually more than that, but I'll just talk about two. One is coercion, right? That's the stuff that we see. That's the boots on the ground. That's the, the masked, who knows who they are. That's the laws, or not even laws, executive orders, right? Being, handed down every other hour, it seems, right? And then the punishments, right? And there's the threats. And we spend a lot of time thinking about those. But more powerful still in these systems are the rewards. The rewards for those who comply, the rewards for those who aren't being targeted. I mean, if you think about Germany in the 1930s, the late 30s and early 40s, what happened when Jews were kicked out of their homes? What happened to their wealth? What happened to their artwork? What happened to Jewish businesses? Who ended up with that? What happened when they were kicked out of their jobs as professors? When they lost their spots as students? Who filled those? A whole lot of people did. A whole lot of people stood to benefit who weren't being targeted. Now, were they complicit? Yeah, they were. Were they perpetrators? Yeah, I think so. And sometimes it's not quite that clear, but as people are paying the costs, as things are being taken away from people, as discipline and punishment are being meted out, some people escape that. Some people openly benefit from that. And I think many of us on this call might stand to benefit, at least in some circumstances. So I think that as we prepare ourselves for whatever lies ahead, one of the ways that we do that is paying attention to not just dodging the bullets, avoiding trouble, but also refusing to benefit from the price that other people are paying. What that looks like, I don't know. We don't know yet. But just keep an eye out for that.
Kristen, while we're on this topic and you're answering, there were a couple of questions about today's Substack that you did and the
Yeah.
book that you recommended. Could you
Yes,
mention
I'd love to talk about that. Yes, I wrote a Substack today with a number of resources. Shout out to some of the really great material that Jamar's producing. I mean, I'm just in awe of what you're able to put out on a weekly basis. So if you aren't following Jamar, go see his material. That speaks very much to these issues and building this resilience and equipping us all. I gave a link to a workshop and podcast that Bishop Marianne Buddy is starting. You'll remember her from her sermon back in January, in which she challenged President Trump. I included a number of different resources there, but I also mentioned this fabulous book. I actually was just texting my son during this call and asked him to go check our mailbox to see if this book has arrived, because it is releasing this week. It has not yet arrived, so I can't hold it up and show you. But the cover is on my Substack today that I published, and it's by Hannah Reichel. And Hannah is a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary, and the book is called For Such a Time as This, and it's an emergency devotional. Now, I was asked to endorse the book, and I at the time I was asked, was not taking any more endorsements. I'm declining all endorsements until I finish my own book at this point. But their editor reached out and said, just take a look at this. It's kind of like Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, but for Christians. And I was like, okay, you got me. I'll take a look. And I sat down, I read the book in one sitting. It is so, so good. So if you're here on this call, I can guarantee this book is for you. If you're struggling to know what to do, if you're wanting to prepare yourself spiritually, practically, this book is perfect. I was so impressed with it. So the book is For Such a Time as This. Hannah Reichel is the author, Reichel. And you can find all the information on my Substack and also on September 17th. So is that soon? Within the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be hosting a webinar with Hannah, and we're going to be talking about the book, and it's going to be live. And we are encouraging as many of you as possible, not just to tune in, but here's another thing: bring some friends. Grab some friends, grab some neighbors, family members, and say, hey, do you want to do this thing with me? Do you want to read this book together? Right? Sometimes those are the best ways to have a conversation, not direct, head on. I need to tell you something more. Let's look at this together. Do you want to join? I'll have some wine. I'll have some hors d'oeuvres, and let's do this thing together. So that's, I think, September 17. All the information is on my Substack, but I cannot recommend the book highly enough. I'm so grateful to Hannah for writing it.
Diana, did you see a question?
Yeah, I saw a thread of questions that I thought were really interesting. Several people said, well, what about the church? You know, can you think of a moment in history when the church has really stood up to fascism and authoritarianism? Or what can the church do to resist XYZ? I would like to underscore something super important, is that, first of all, the church as a category should not really ever exist in anybody's mind, because the church is not one thing. Even if you're a Roman Catholic, that's not really the case. The church is not one thing. The church is many things. And if you're looking for examples in history of when an institution that was a religious institution that was close to the state actually had enough courage to resist political movements that they benefited from financially or otherwise, all I can say is good luck to you, because that is not going to happen. It really hasn't happened. I was thinking back in my mind, when has the church resisted authoritarianism? And if a church is close to a government, if a church is close to an economic system, if an institutional church is close to any kind of power center, it will not stand up against abuses within that system unless it is forced by the people in its own pews to do so. That is just absent from the historical record, with that sort of exception. Now, what isn't absent from the historical record are all the people who were the troublemakers in church history, who pressed the institutions to do that very thing that I'm just talking about. They either went outside of the institutions and started other kinds of movements that would speak an alternative Christianity over and against the power center, or they risked everything within any kind of institutional power, prestige, or whatever they had. They risked it all in order to try to witness to the institution itself and pressure the institution towards change. And so there's really only two options here for Christians. You got to get together with like-minded Christians who already get what the problem is and who already understand the abuses of authority and who are willing to stand up against those things. And you might have to form some sort of alternate kind of way of being in communication with each other, or empowering one another, supporting, encouraging one another. I think that's one of the things we actually are trying to do a little bit of here. The other thing is, if you are within an institution and you have some sort of power, this is your time to spend it. And that's we're seeing some
Cash in the chips. That's right. This is the time.
This is the time. If you have ever wanted to risk your job, your career, your health insurance, any of those things for something that was right and that would make a difference historically, hello, welcome to the fight. And you might say, well, hey, look like what's happening in the Episcopal Church with Marianne Buddy. She's like standing up. Well, I was just with a group of Episcopalians in a southern state a few weeks ago, and they were having Marianne Buddy's behind for dinner. They were Episcopalians, and they actually hated everything that was coming from her and from the presiding bishop's office and from the social justice ministries in the Episcopal Church. And they were saying things like, this is, I literally was laughing because they didn't know me that well. You know, they're like having my friends for dinner, cutting them up on plates in front of me. And so, but they were just doing it. This is why we hate the Episcopal Church. I'm not going to give my money anymore if they keep up with this stuff. Don't they understand that Donald Trump is the best thing that's ever happened for America? It was amazing. And so you're seeing, if you watch our shows or read our Substacks, you're seeing those few really brave people who are actually cashing in the chips within their own denominations. Now, they do happen to have a lot of power within those denominations, and that's fantastic. And they are leveraging it in ways that I admire. And I have praised them personally as my friends for doing it. Honestly, it mostly surprises me. And I'm happy to be surprised. And so yeah, that's it. The church is not one thing. And if you're a Christian, you're the church. And so what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to pressure whatever institution you are in to have a backbone. And that comes from the pews or its pulpits or its government offices. And if you're not willing to do that, I don't know what else to say.
So Diana, I'm here, as I said, in London. I've been editing and trying to finish this book, and I was working on a section today about the church, and I'm going to share a little bit of it because it's right on the money, right from your piece. So hot off the press, but it's like a paragraph. So bear with me, but it's exactly what you're saying, Diana. I was struggling with the exact same thoughts about like, what is the church? What can we expect from the church? What can we expect from Christianity? And basically, this is kind of where this is where I kind of ended up with on this. So I was kind of thinking about my kind of early thoughts about the church. And I was thinking about Baldwin, James Baldwin, who, when he was asked about hope and all that, he basically said, I know we can be better than we are, was kind of some of his wisdom. But then I wrote this. I said, but to be better, we'll need to stop thinking that our salvation will come from some external source. When I was younger, I kept looking to the Bible or theology or the church as things that would guide us into the beloved community or at least keep us from each other's throats. But if white Christians in the age of Trump have confirmed anything, is that these religious resources are infinitely malleable. They are powerless to protect us from ourselves. In the end, all we have is our humanity and a sense of responsibility for each other. We must shoulder the terrifying realization that we are the only ones who can determine whether the tools in our hands are swords or plowshares. We ultimately decide whether these implements will be used for violence or peace, alienation or community, hate or love. Christianity, or for that matter, Islam or Judaism or Zoroastrianism, becomes, in every generation, what we allow it to be. If we want it to help us kill in the name of a plundering empire, it will oblige. If we want it to assist in caring for the widow and the orphan, it is amenable to that too. But it is we and not the Bible or the church who will determine which Christianity and which America becomes reality in the world.
Amen. That's exactly it. You are the church. It's the same thing that my Methodist Sunday school teacher taught me in 3rd grade. If you want the church to behave differently, you got to do it. And even if it's lonely or what have you, it's not going to change by any institution that's close to that power. The institutions are going to hold on to power as long as they can, and they will compromise as much as possible. And if anything we should have learned over the last 7 months by watching what's going on with the Trump administration, it should be exactly that. Look at who's capitulated. Look at the institutions that have given in. Most of them. It's the rare ones that stand up. And so that's what we have to do. And thank you so much, Robby. That's a great quote.
Okay, Robby, I just have to ask, is that literally your first draft? Is that how the words go from your head to the page?
Oh no, that's like draft number 12 or something.
Okay, thank you. Because I was just gonna like throw in the towel here.
No. Like this
beautiful.
is in struggle. Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Well, thank you though. Yeah.
Oh, I have a question I want to throw out to the group here from Edward. Edward says, I'm curious if the historians think we may be heading toward what journalist Jeff Charlotte refers to as a slow civil war. I know many of us are friends of Jeff or have read his work here. What do you all think?
Sadly, I've always thought Jeff was right. I've always tried to argue with him. Oh no, Jeff, it's more optimistic than that. And then he 4 or 5 months, 2 years later, he was always more right than I was.
I mean, part of me says, I mean, this may be the optimistic outcome. We need resistance to have a civil war. Mm-hmm. And we're just talking about the mass capitulation. I saw Ruth Ben-Ghiat had a video on this a couple of days ago, and it just really resonated. Like we knew things were coming down the chute. I think most of us in this space kind of thought we'd see a little bit more resistance from corporations, from legal firms, from institutions, from universities, from churches, right? Again, there are benefits to be had, and it's not just avoiding the punishment, it's getting in on the spoils, or even, the truth is the vast majority are not going to get in on the spoils. We talked before about kind of, seeing this whole regime as a pyramid scheme, right? People buy in thinking that they're gonna hit it rich. That's not the way this works. Like fewer than 0.1% strike it rich. And how do they? On the backs of everybody else, right? But it's this promise, it's this allure. So yeah. Anyway, I digress. But to have a slow civil war, we need some resistance. There are other options. There are other outcomes here too. Lots of things can happen. That's a point I made in today's post too. History is filled with surprises.
Yes.
Right? We had the rumors about Trump's health over the weekend. If you're looking closely, you see divisions in the MAGA world. A lot of divisions. They have had thus far kind of a common cause, enough of a common cause, primarily destruction, destroy what we have. But there are a lot of divisions there too. And then there's always a chance that more people will wake up.
Jamar, you're the only one who hasn't answered the history of the Civil War question.
Well, I think it's going to look different. So some people are talking about slow secession. And they've done that in relationship to blue states who contribute all these tax dollars to the federal government and just saying, we're not going to do that anymore until you protect democracy. That's resistance, if you can find it. And I think it's going to take actions on that scale. But I've often thought about what does post-Trump look like? Because we're not out of the woods. All of these stories that we've shared and that you've shared in the comments about people being gleeful about what's happening, saying it's never been better. That's not going to go away if Trump dies or gets out of office or anything like that. And so, in the Civil War, all throughout it, basically, Lincoln was thinking about reunification and reconciliation and made a bunch of compromises along the way to try to get to that. And I just wonder what that would look like now. And one of the things that history is about continuity and discontinuity. So there's some continuity in terms of deep, deep division, but there's a lot of discontinuity. Number one, this isn't sectional. This isn't North versus South. This is ideological. This is red versus blue states and cities. You can see the cities being targeted right now. And then another major point of discontinuity is the technology. We are incessantly, and I think that gets to what the comment that we started out with was, about all this doom and gloom. Well, part of the reason why it feels like there's so much doom and gloom is because we have a 24/7 news cycle and 24/7 access to information, including breaking news, right? So that supercharges division because, in my personal opinion, and Robby, I know y'all have done polling on this, the isolated information ecosystems is an outsized cause of the division here. There are people who are living in a Fox News and worse reality who absolutely have no concept of what's really going on because that's all they consume. And that is so dangerous. So I don't, what I'm saying is Civil War, I don't know. We have this concept in our brains about what that looks like in the 1860s. It's not going to look like that in the 21st century. But these divisions are so deep. I don't know what reunification looks like at this point.
Can I just make a quick comment to a question that came into the chat that I think speaks right to this question of civil war? Is somebody said, what about Gaza? And, you know, since we're all specialists in American stuff, either, you know, we do our work statistically or historically, primarily in America. We have talked about Gaza along the way. But one of the ways that I think about it, especially in this kind of context, is that what's happened in Gaza is a very horrifying example, obviously, of when authoritarianism actually does seize power in a democratic country. And that's the piece that so many people forget, is that before all this, there's been Netanyahu, who always has been authoritarian. So many of my best Jewish friends, people I work with regularly in rabbinic communities, etc., have hated him since the go of it, you know, since he showed up on the political scene. They thought he was dangerous and that he made all kinds of authoritarian moves, including rigging elections and undoing court systems and changing around the way different things worked politically in Israel, until he could get to the point where there was functionally sort of control that he could maintain over the military and then do exactly what he has wanted to do, despite the fact that popular opinion had turned on him months and months and months and months and months ago, regarding the conduct of this war. And so Gaza stands on its own as a terrible problem, and also just a horrific event as a global community. But it also stands as an incredibly stark lesson as to what can happen when a democratic country decides to choose an authoritarian direction. And I think that, in effect, what's gone on in Israel has been a bit of a model for some of the people who are in and around the Trump administration. And also, Netanyahu used our political system in order to help manipulate our public opinion to not elect Kamala Harris, who made plenty of mistakes around this issue. But Netanyahu's propaganda machine was all over that. And he manipulated the American political process in such a way that Trump would get into office. And he bears responsibility for that. So we talk about global authoritarianism, and usually we think about Russia, or we think about China, and we think about Ukraine, or we might think about some of the really horrible violent stuff that's happened in China. But to look at Israel as an example of a democratic country gone authoritarian and what could be in the future of the United States, I think is very important for us to be aware of the interlocking sort of chords of global authoritarianism and how it manifests differently in different settings with different purposes, but also always results in massive violence, scapegoating, and the elimination of whole populations of human beings for the sake of the wealth of a few.
I think that's such an important perspective. Y'all, this is not just a United States issue. There's a global rise in authoritarianism. The United States tends to suck up all the air in the room because it's the biggest and the richest kind of a thing, but it's happening in a lot of places. And it is really sorry for more doom and gloom, but that's the reality here. Any closing thoughts as we come to a wrap here? Thing burning that you just didn't get to say. Well, I am so, first of all, y'all have been so active in the chat and I love it. This
Thank
is
you.
what we're
It's so
about.
Yeah,
good.
thanks for inviting.
So good. It's such a source of encouragement to us to read your comments, to read your conversations with each other. Again, like we're here to learn, and we're here to know that we're not alone. And each of us here, we get that from you. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for the chatter and for sticking with us. Really, we would not be doing this if it weren't for you, and I don't think we could be doing this if it weren't for you all.
And I'm super excited to see y'all connecting and trying to organize offline. Please feel free to do that. And I want to close as we did last time with a couple of comments. This is from our last conversation, which was posted on YouTube. Someone in the chat asked if this conversation would be available to share. Yes, it'll be on our YouTube page. We'll also post about it at convocation.substack.com. Here's a few comments. Frederick no, sorry. Pam Cole said, "What an excellent program. Thank you so very much." And then April Wright said, "This was a great conversation today. Thanks for your thoughts on all topics. I'm glad we still have people to stand up." And then this one was my favorite. I think this is in response to something Diana said. Sharon Coring says, "Bitcoin indulgences!" Three exclamation points. Holy moly. Thanks for some light moments in the context of misery. Appreciate you for so much, even in the speechless moments. Yes, as my therapist friend would say, trauma laughter bonds us. So yes, Diana coined the term Bitcoin indulgences, and or Robby, I can't remember, but yes.
Combination of the brilliance of Robby and my bumbling into the sort of conversation, I think, that coined it together.
A group effort, as we often say. So we do this once a month live, but we're on every week, and sometimes it'll be three of us, and sometimes it'll be all four. And so we are at 11,000 subscribers on our Substack, and we are at 4.4 thousand subscribers on our YouTube page. Please share, share, share. If this is helpful to you, just on your social media, in a text message, in an email to someone, just let other people know so that we can spread the word. Thank you so much for joining on this special episode of the Convocation Unscripted Live. Remember to subscribe to our Substack and our individual Substacks, and we will see you on the next Convocation. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye, Al.